potentially, if we can get the dates to work.
Yeah.
Cool. We're rolling.
Okay, we're filming?
We are filming.
Amazing. So, welcome to the next episode of Raise. Coming up on this episode of Raise.
It spirals into an insecurity, which then can spiral into lack of confidence or poor performance.
They were like, oh, well, you know, when you get senior enough, you should seem unflappable. And I was like, why?
What does happen when you get into senior leadership is you learn how to channel that flappability.
Yeah.
You just said something that's so critical there. The authenticity.
Yeah. I feel so uncomfortable in that space that I feel like I just have to jump in.
Yeah.
If your team are giving you feedback and you have an open dialogue or conversation, perfect.
Yeah.
You may not be hearing everything you want to hear, but that's fine. You can learn and grow and change. Welcome to Raise, the podcast for fundraisers by fundraisers. Thank you so much for joining us today. So today on the podcast, you've got myself and Christine, and we're going to be chatting all things insecurities. We were going to be doing a podcast on imposter syndrome, and then we recorded with an amazing episode, which you will already have seen with Dee, who really challenged us in the space of thinking about what imposter syndrome really means. And we regrouped, we had a thought, and now we're going to do an episode on insecurities.
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to do this, actually. And it's kind of nice that it's just the two of us talking about this.
Yes, it feels right.
Yeah.
It's the two of us tackling this together.
Because it's such a personal topic, I think, when we talk about insecurities. And in the same breath, it's actually not, right? Because everybody has insecurities.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are.
But we don't talk about it. So
No, it's like really taboo to talk about. And because you're always just kind of expected, or you feel like you're expected or required to kind of just fake it till you make it, to kind of just go away and find the answer and not really be able to be comfortable being insecure.
I want to do the Taylor Swift lyric of Lights. Was it, what is in I Can Do It With a Broken Heart? It's like,
Lights,
camera bitch, smile.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lights, camera, bitch, smile. It's my number 3 most listened to song on Spotify Wrapped. I don't know.
How many times do you think we can bring Spotify Wrapped up on this podcast?
I don't know, but I'm not sure if we have to credit them or not, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Yeah, I think when we talk about insecurities, especially in a work context, which within Raise, that's really what this is about, and I think specifically in fundraising, when we talk about insecurities in that space, it's often perceived as a weakness.
Yeah.
To have insecurities.
You're a line manager now.
Yeah,
You should not have
you're a
any
leader.
insecurities. Like, no anxiety, no frustration, like nothing. You should just smash it.
You have to know the answer to everything all of the time, right? Just like that. That was a snap.
snap.
It was a really weak snap on my left hand.
Maybe that's one of your insecurities. But like somebody said to me the other day, they were like, oh, well, you know, when you get senior enough, you should seem unflappable. And I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Because actually, all that tells my team and everybody who works with me is that if you're still flappable, you can't be in senior leadership.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
No, it's not true. But I do think what does happen when you get into senior leadership is you learn how to channel that flappability.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that diplomacy. But that doesn't mean that you're inflappable, and that doesn't mean that you don't have insecurities. And I think that humility, ultimately, and that humanity are really, really important traits that you need to carry throughout your career.
Yeah.
And when we were talking earlier, we talked a little bit, and we talked about this a lot over the years that we've known each other, the resiliency required in fundraising.
Yeah.
Because we get told no every single day.
Every single flipping day.
By people outside of our organizations, by people in our organizations. It's constant, right?
Yeah.
Well, how in a world where you have to be so resilient all of the time, could you also therefore not have insecurities?
Yeah.
Like those things feel counterintuitive. They don't feel right.
Yeah. Okay, so before we dive properly into this episode, so today we are drinking, you say it right, I don't. Pickpool. One of my insecurities is that I pronounce wine wrong, and Christine corrects me every single flipping time when we're out.
I hope I don't do it in a mean way.
No, but you do correct me. I remember like one of the first times we went out and I like said, I'm going to say it wrong now as well, Rioja wrong, and you were like, that's not how you say it, Sian.
Well, It is Rioja.
Yeah, like that.
If you are doing it in the way that the Spanish pronounce the word Rioja, which means red,
But what happens if it's a white?
it's the grape.
Okay.
It's the Rioja.
Fine.
But in the UK, for some reason, the English, I don't know. I'm American, so you can come at me in the comments. It's fine. But I don't know why you say Rioja, because it's not. It's really not Rioja. Same way it's not jalapeno. It's a jalapeno. I want to just be really clear about that.
I don't think anyone's going to get jalapeno.
I've literally heard people say that.
Anyway.
And cheers to raising money, voices, and glasses.
Amazing.
Yes.
But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about insecurities, and you and me have a ton of them, and I am really, I guess I kind of want to like start out and say it's okay.
Yeah.
Like it is, and actually I don't think like self-doubt and insecurity is necessarily a bad thing.
No.
And actually I think a lot of times that pushes me to be better, but there has to be a safe zone as well.
Yeah.
Like you can't be so insecure all the time that you're just not comfortable delivering your job.
Yeah. There's a balance, right, between being insecure and being self-aware of
Yes.
where you need to develop and what your
Yes.
weaknesses are. And often, because you have a development need, which we all have them,
Yeah.
but because you have
Of course
this
you do.
development need, it spirals into an insecurity, which then can spiral into lack of confidence or poor performance or anything else. And so I think it's how you identify that insecurity and then what you do with it.
Yeah.
Like that's really where like the ownership of it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I think, so like, I'm someone who really struggles with anxiety, and like, and I've always been, I'm really open with my team about it. I was really open with you about it when we worked together, and like, I go to therapy regularly and I try and
same.
unpick my anxiety and like, and then you will have had me say this on an earlier podcast, but like, I genuinely think therapy makes me a better manager.
Yeah.
Like, I know spending that time, I do it every other week.
Yeah.
It makes me a better leader,
I-
hands down.
I think it goes outside of line management though, too. And leadership. I think it goes into like how you what's the word? There's like how you comport yourself.
Compose yourself, or
Yeah, maybe
comport. It's that really old. I hate the phrase, but I don't have a better one for you right now, which is personal brand.
Yeah, it's like how you present yourself, I guess,
Yeah.
basically. It affects you potentially in more or different ways if you are a people manager and you are an expected leader in your organization, but actually it is so much more than that, and it can affect every single level of every type of fundraiser. And I think one of the things that can be really useful is having a space to have a positive, open conversation about challenges
Yeah.
in which insecurities become part of that discussion.
So that's probably just a really really good question for us to dive into. So how do you find a balance between owning your insecurities and being like, this is okay, everybody has insecurities, but striking a balance with your team and people around you of still projecting some sort of confidence and some sort of like, I do know what I'm doing, I do know I'm really good at my job, I was hired because I know how to do this really, really well.
Yeah.
But I have the humility to say, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, there's things I'm not going to get right.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember, you are hired to do a job because you know how to do a job.
Yeah.
Or you're hired to do a job because somebody sees the potential in you and you were
Yes.
therefore immediately put into a training program. Or you're put into a probation program that has training as part of it.
Yeah.
Informal or formal training is irrelevant. People do not hire people into jobs because they think they are crap at that job.
Yeah.
So, by virtue of the fact that you are there, you have a seat at that table
Yes.
and
And a voice.
a voice.
Whether you choose to use it or not is your choice. But,
But you do. And I think it's important for you, that person, me, you, to remember that. Like, it's not a fluke that
Yeah.
you are where you are. It's because you have portrayed an example. It's because you have the right attitude. It's because of your experience, whether directly in fundraising or outside of it, that you are there. And so that needs to give you the confidence to be like, hey, I know if we're running this, I'll take a topic I know nothing about, which is evidenced by the fact that I think we're on TikTok when we're not. If you are running a individual giving campaign,
Yes.
with social media as a core element of it, and you are the manager of that campaign and you are running it all and you are working with the marketing team and you're working with a content person or a social media manager or however it's working, you are leading that. That is your space. That doesn't mean that you know the ins and outs of the pixel size for the graphic that needs to go in a certain thing.
Yeah.
But you do know what that graphic needs to look like. You know the feeling
or
you
the
need.
metrics that success would be.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And that's I think the difference that we get confused with on like being able to say like, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing, like I can lead this, blah blah blah. But equally I have some spaces to learn from like a really operational perspective, like not even getting into like senior leadership, just on a real basic level. That's where that comes from.
Yeah. Yes. And that, no, I completely agree. And I do think there's something that we look at other people and assume that they're fine. And I think it's really easy to look at other people in the sector or the people that you work with and think, but they've got it together. They don't have any insecurities. They're fine. And I remember and obviously we're not going to call it imposter syndrome because we've got a whole episode on that. But I remember having a conversation with somebody recently and them saying, oh, do you know what imposter syndrome is? And I was like, yeah, like, do I know what imposter syndrome is? I own that every single day.
Yeah.
And them saying, are you sure? Like, because you just don't look like it from the outside. You just don't look like somebody who would get imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
At which point I was thinking, you clearly just don't know me that well. But
it goes into the thing, right? Where like you never know what's going on in
somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to, I think comport yourself is the right phrase from earlier.
Comport. That is, thank you.
There you go. It is,
I appreciate that you came up with the word.
It is easy to comport yourself in a way that does make it look like you are unflappable and you don't have any insecurities. I really strongly believe that I would rather my team knew that I did have insecurities and that I, like, sometimes I did find things difficult and that there was a real humility within my leadership, because I never want them to think that if you have any of those feelings, you can't get to where you are. I just, you have to have it all sorted out before you can possibly think about being senior, and like that's just not the case.
I do think that there's something in that though, right? About that's building trust with your team as well. Yeah. And that creates, and that goes into things we've talked about before about that psychological safety space. We talked about that from like an accountability perspective. Like there's a lot of ways that kind of plays into things, but I think one of the things that's really important is creating a space where it's okay to be upset that something didn't go right too. Yeah. Like when something goes wrong, it's not good to wallow, but it is okay to be like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Like it's okay to be like
really flipping irritating.
Yeah, it's okay to be annoyed in that space. And I don't think that's a big problem. What's important that you do is you kind of take it and you go, okay, not great.
What did I learn?
How do I
make sure this doesn't happen?
What are we going to do next? How are we going to shift it? Yeah. And how am I going to work with my leadership team? Like, how do I go to my manager? And a good leader creates that airspace for you. They deal with, like, the upper level hail. Yes. And
This is a Nick Pride comment.
It is a Nick Pride comment.
Which is great leadership creates airspace and ground cover?
Yes.
Something like that.
We should actually just get Nick
We
Pride
should just
on.
get Nick on the podcast. But
Nick, will you be on the podcast?
Yeah, Nick, please come on the podcast.
Please come on the podcast.
But I loved it. Like, I remember we went out for a drink with Nick. We went to a bottomless with Nick. Um,
Oh my God, we did. I forgot. Probably because it was bottomless.
but I like it's, you know, sometimes when you're listening to someone, you're chatting to somebody in the sector, and again, this is kind of where this podcast has been born from, you know, go out and create great networks, grab a glass of wine with people. I just remember that really stuck with me. Nick, like we were just genuinely chatting. We were talking about leadership.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about like questions when you get asked about leadership in an interview, and Nick was like, "Oh, this is what I say," and both of us were like, "Whoa,
Tell us more."
Yeah, tell us more. Like, tell me more.
How do we do this? No.
Yeah,
I think, but this, I mean, that is literally the ethos of what we're talking about, because we are, you know, one of the most important things about this conversation and this podcast from the very beginning is that it feels like we're sitting around the pub having a conversation. This is where you learn. This is where you get to tease those tricky things out. This is where you get to have crunchy conversations where you're like, hey, like, so this happened to me today. I don't know. There's myriad examples of something that could have happened. And you're like, how do I respond to that? And what is the impact of my response?
Yeah.
And that can bear out insecurities.
yes,
And I think that that's actually a really powerful thing.
yeah,
Sometimes what is more detrimental is if you have insecurities and you are scared of them and you don't own them.
yeah.
Because then how do you address them?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. So we're both dyslexic.
Yes.
Like, which I think we're like very happy to own.
Yeah. I'm dyslexic and I shake. It's a really good combination.
Great. And I've definitely felt it kind of like as I've like moved up in my career that like, you know, writing good emails or there being no typos and things. And it's such a silly thing, but like I really feel it. And like the amount of times I have to ask somebody to be like, can you proof this for me?
Yeah.
Like I don't understand grammar. Please proof this for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I'm good at grammar, but I really struggle with acronyms, especially when I'm speaking. And I work in the INGO space. There are so many acronyms.
Yeah.
Like there's so many acronyms in international development that you're like, I'm constantly getting letters flipped around. They're completely different things, and I have to really police myself.
Yeah.
But I also own it. I'm like, I'm gonna get this acronym wrong. Like it's gonna happen, and it's not me being rude. It's not me being whatever. It's just real.
I think as well, like one of the things, and I think maybe you've struggled with this as well, is being younger than your team.
Yeah.
And for me, like I've always found that really tricky. And actually, especially you know when people like trying to talk around it, they're like, "How old are you?"
Yeah.
Or they ask you really leading questions, trying to like suss out how old you are. And it's this really weird thing where I'm like, "But I've got 12 years of experience. I've really gone out and like owned my career. Why does it matter how old I am?"
Yeah. So I recently was editing a job description for somebody. And one of the things they wrote in this job description was that somebody needed to have 8+ years of experience. And I took that out
Yes.
because that starts to be agey,
Yeah.
right? Because really what we want is that they have experience raising a certain number. Like we want to make sure that
confidently ask for 7-figure sum.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Like, so that's really what it's about. It has less to do on the years of experience. And I think age is a funny one. Ironically, for doing a podcast, I have a really big insecurity around my voice because for a long time, I thought my voice sounded like a cartoon character and super young. And especially when I was blonde, short, American, high-pitched voice, younger and in like a leadership position, I really was like, nobody's gonna take me seriously. So I like doubled down on like, I'm really good. And it kind of went against me in some ways.
Yeah.
Like I had to learn the balance.
Yes.
And that I was really the only one judging myself
Yeah.
that way.
I think this is really interesting. So on a previous episode, we were chatting with Damien, and I kind of said, I was like, that first team management job I did I was terrible. And I can look back on that and I can know I was terrible.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that I felt so insecure was I was really young.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I had to go out and really own and be really firm and strict and all of those things, because I was like, well, I can't remember, I was like 25, 26.
Yeah.
And so to get respect, I have to really project this overconfident, and it wasn't me.
Yeah.
That it came across as really inauthentic.
Yeah.
And actually, the older I've got, the longer I have been in leadership, the more comfortable I am in the space, the more I've chilled out.
Yeah. And that, you just said something that's so critical there. The authenticity.
Yes.
So if you are not authentic in owning your space, the good and the bad.
Yes.
People see that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the number one thing that you will do that will lose you respect.
Yeah.
Is not being authentic, not being trustworthy, lacking integrity.
Yeah.
And all of that winds up together. Twines was what came out of my mouth to begin with. But it winds together to then create the lack of credibility that, ironically, we're scared of in our insecurities.
Yeah.
So it's a perpetuating cycle if you don't just be authentic.
Yeah. And I think maybe I sometimes err too much on the authenticity side.
Mm.
But I will often be like, do you know what? I can't do this meeting because I've got therapy. This is my time. This is where I'm going. I will tell you where I'm going, but this is I'm not taking any time off for this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to move this. I think just owning that and saying, actually, this is where I'm going. This is where I'm taking time. Or owning when you got therapy and owning when you do things wrong. I think for me, I do think it's important to own those mess ups and to say, actually, do you know what? I didn't get this right. And the thing that I learned was X, Y, and Z. And I'll do better next time.
Yeah. But that's the learning bit. That's also important in that.
Yeah.
So that goes into the whole cycle of authenticity, accountability, learning, and change. Mm-hmm. Which isn't an acronym, but it should be. Just going back to all of that, I think what's interesting in this space is that donors also respond incredibly well to authenticity.
Yeah.
And know when you're not being authentic.
Yes.
And so some of the best fundraisers are ones that can find that point of commonality in an authentic way. Mm. And it is a thread that goes through all of those elements then, right? Yeah. It goes through your leadership, it goes through your accountability, it goes through how you are developing your actual fundraising career, and it goes into how you actually build a rapport with your donors and how you're known.
Yeah.
And I think that can feel harder when you do mass and public fundraising, but actually it's not different because you're still composing emails. You're still composing a tone of voice.
Yeah.
And you're creating a social contract with hundreds of thousands of people at one time. And that you're telling them the truth. And they're going to trust you with their money to go to the impact that you say it's going to go to.
Yeah.
So you have to be authentic.
Yeah.
To do that. And you have to be authentic to own your insecurities and build on them.
But have enough self-awareness in that space.
Yes.
To know what your, not just what your insecurities are. I think maybe insecurities are really easy to own, but to also own, this may be how I make people feel.
Yeah.
Or, so I need to be aware of it.
Yeah.
This may be, I've always had that, idea of being too much, too loud, too noisy, too confident, too, and you're like, actually, maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's okay that I use my voice. Maybe it's okay that, like, sometimes I go out and I really heavily advocate for my team, and I'm not going to be embarrassed about that.
No. I think have self-awareness and then understand
How
what
do
your
you maximize
boundaries
it?
are
Yeah.
in flexibility,
Yeah.
right? There are some times where you're like, I, full force, going in, have to go in. Other times where you're like, if I'm going to take up the space that I naturally want to take up, I'm going to take all the air in this room.
Yeah.
And this room requires me to just bring it down
Yeah.
a notch
Yeah.
until it's the right moment
Yeah.
to raise
To bring
it
it
up.
back up.
And that doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. That means you're reading a space.
Yeah. That is actually something I really struggle with, and I think because I am a huge extrovert and I am somebody who like just naturally has a lot of energy, and it was a piece of feedback Esther gave me, I think, via you when we did a leadership. Oh no, we did a team away day.
Yes. Best team away day I think I've ever done in my
Yes, it
life.
was Shard, wasn't it?
It was so good.
And it was, you had gone out for a drink afterwards and you texted me and you were like, oh, just like a really good piece of feedback, and it was so useful, which was, it is okay sometimes to sit back. And I think one of my insecurities is feeling like nobody's engaging, or feeling like there's silence in a room and that I need to fill it. And I feel so uncomfortable in that space that I feel like I just have to jump in.
Yeah.
And like take up room, because I'm like, oh, you know, like we've got this external person who's facilitating and nobody's answering the question. I find that awkward, so therefore I want to make the situation less awkward. But actually Esther's feedback for me in that space was, that's okay.
It's okay for it to be awkward.
And actually you need, as a leader, you need to learn to step back and give your team that space to think and to then go out and own it themselves.
Because then they'll never step up because they know you will.
Yes.
That is so hard to do in practice.
It is really flipping hard. I really struggle with that. So, the same questions that we ask everybody to wrap these episodes. What's the one thing that you would wish people took away with you? Like, what's the one piece of advice you want people to hear today?
I think for me on insecurities, the one piece of advice that I want people to take away is that insecurities are not a negative thing in and of themselves. And they are very valid and normal, and you should feel insecurities. What's important is how you identify and own them. And I think that is the most important thing. And then you can get on to all the other things we talked about being authentic, about addressing them, about all of those things. But I think first you need to be comfortable with them and identify.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I definitely think that. And I think it kind of feeds into what I was going to say, which I think is self-awareness.
Yeah.
So I think there is a part of knowing yourself and knowing that there are things that are just innately you.
Yeah.
And actually they're not necessarily bad things, but use them to your advantage, that utilize them in the right way for you. So you're confident. How do you create that confidence to work on behalf of your team?
Yeah.
Or like, how do you use that to go out and ask for like really amazing sums of money for your charity because you feel really passionate about the cause? How do you own that space? But having that self-awareness of knowing and understanding what your insecurities are, but also what your strengths are, right?
Yeah.
And then like weaving those into the way that you work, I think is really, really important. And asking for feedback, like just genuinely ask for feedback, genuinely work well with your team and your other stakeholders. And
don't be scared of that feedback.
Yeah, because actually if somebody's feeding back to you, they want you to be able to do better.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that when my team stop giving you feedback, you are in danger zone because they've stopped caring enough to engage in the process. If your team are giving you feedback and you have an open dialogue or conversation, perfect.
Yeah.
You may not be hearing everything you want to hear, but that's fine. You can learn and grow and change, or take it on board. But if they are so disengaged that they are not giving you feedback, then you are in serious trouble.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so good. Sian, I love it when, I love having all of our guests. I think they're phenomenal, but it's so nice when we just get to like have a conversation and it's so like real.
I feel like it's even more real when it's just the two of us.
I know. It's like, no, this is literally.
I feel like we're not on best behavior. We're like, oh, we haven't got a guest.
I know. We're like, warts and all.
Yeah, we're like, refill the wine glasses.
Like, do we just pause here? That's great. Yeah, so Sian, thank you so much for such a lovely conversation. It was so nice.
Thank you for coming on this crazy podcast journey with me and not laughing at me when I send you all of my insane ideas. So thank you.
I mean, I love your insane ideas. And I love Raise, and I'm so glad we're doing this.
Me too.
So I hope that our listeners have found this a really useful conversation and podcast. And if you think this is going to help somebody, then please do share it. It's going to make a huge difference to raise this phenomenal space that we've created. If you could please like and subscribe on however you're listening. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, you can listen on Spotify, you can listen on YouTube. Please, 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 if you could leave a review, that really helps the algorithm. And apparently the algorithm really likes interaction, so we do too. You can find us on our website at thisisraise.co.uk, and you can find us on Instagram at Raise Charity Pod, where Sian does all of the social media magic. So so thank you so much for listening, and until next time, let's do a cheers to raising money, voices, and glasses. Cheers!
Great.